Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, IndyStar, Indianapolis Star, talking to you on a Tuesday afternoon. It's September 12th, 2023. Putting together this video here after some news last night that really created some waves. We broke this story yesterday around dinner time that Indiana is withdrawing from the only remaining game beyond this weekend in what was originally a 3-game series with Louisville. It was supposed to be a neutral site game, which is still on for this weekend. Obviously, Indiana will play Louisville at noon Saturday at Lucas Oil Stadium. They were supposed to play at Louisville next year and then in Bloomington the year after that. Mike Nizilik, my colleague at the Bloomington Herald-Times, already reported back in August that they were in the process of withdrawing from the 2025 game. They have also officially sort of delivered notice to withdraw from the 2024 game as well. The 25 game comes with no penalty. The 2024 game will cost Indiana $1 million because it comes within basically a 2-year window in which you have to pay a $1 million essentially withdrawal penalty for coming, for notifying the other side, in this case Louisville, that you want out of that game within 2 years of kickoff. Indiana is expected to replace that game in all likelihood with an FCS opponent. Don't know who yet. I would imagine that'll firm up pretty quickly. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear something in the not very distant future, maybe the next couple months. But Indiana now will have, in all likelihood, an FCS opponent, FIU and Charlotte all at home in the non-conference next year. The belief is, and I think this is pretty understandable, Indiana having an extra home game next season will more than pay for the $1 million withdrawal fee, because when you factor in tickets, concessions, parking, everything Indiana gets from a home game, it comes out at over $1 million just in total sort of some money. Beyond just sort of, I guess, the sort of back and forth with fans of, is Indiana afraid of Louisville? Is this Indiana sort of not wanting to face Louisville? This really isn't, and I thought it was important to do, or I thought it would at least be meaningful, informative to do a quick video on this. This really isn't about Louisville. Louisville's the opponent. It's about Indiana trying to pave a smoother non-conference schedule going forward. And there's some important background for this. When the Big Ten went to a 9-game schedule in 2014, it also added a rule that said every Big Ten team had to play at least one Power 5 opponent every single year in non-conference play. There were small, there were grace windows for like a Cincinnati was, I think Indiana had Cincinnati the last couple of years. That was a Power 5 opponent when Indiana scheduled it. Cincinnati wound up moving to the AAC. So, those were sort of grandfathered in. But the idea was you had to play a team like that at minimum every single year if you were Indiana or any team in the Big Ten. That's why Indiana played Missouri. It's why Indiana played Wake Forest. All those kinds of games that we've seen Indiana in the past 10 years or so. And the Big Ten also said at that time that basically you couldn't play FCS games except under certain conditions, like, for example, years where you only had 4 Big Ten home games because you'd have an unbalanced home-road conference schedule. The Big Ten has more or less relaxed those rules anymore. It's not backing off from non-conference games, but it has, without making a great deal of fanfare around this, told schools they don't have to hold tight to that anymore the way that they once did, the non-conference requirements, the sort of limited access to FCS matchups, and crucially, the Power 5 requirements. And Indiana, I think understandably, looking at a Big Ten schedule that's only going to get harder with USC, Oregon, UCLA, and Washington all coming into the conference. This was a time when Indiana was supposed to be getting out of the Big Ten East, supposed to be getting away from having to play the heavy hitters every single year. You knew you'd see them some, but you didn't necessarily have to see them every single year. Well, now, in an 18-team conference that's got those 4 schools, plus Ohio State, plus Michigan, plus Penn State, plus Wisconsin, plus, whether Minnesota's good or maybe Nebraska gets going under Matt Rule, you're just not going to be able to avoid some of those bigger matchups most years. And frankly, I think Indiana, in conversations I've had behind the scenes, I don't think Indiana's that bothered if people sort of criticize them for being soft in scheduling, if it means that they can build non-conference schedules that are more conducive to Indiana participating in bowl games. And so I think for the foreseeable future, you are going to see more moves like this. People have asked about the Notre Dame series. I haven't heard anything specific on that. Obviously, that's a few years down the road. I do think there's still some value for Indiana in, some series like that, some more prestigious series, frankly. But, I don't want to call it run of the mill, but the Louisvilles, the Wake Forests, we'll see, for example, what might happen with Indiana and Virginia. I think they've got a series coming up in a couple, 3 years. Those kinds of games, I think you're going to see Indiana moving away from those because, frankly, Indiana really does just want to play non-conference schedules that make the odds of getting to bowl eligibility better, because that's, I think, Indiana, and you can argue the merits of this or not, but I certainly at least understand the point. Indiana feels like that is the best way to sort of build its program right now, is to get to a place where it can consistently find its way to bowl eligibility and where it can sort of sell the idea of, hey, at Indiana, we're not going to throw up unnecessary roadblocks to getting to the postseason and having those kinds of opportunities that might build some momentum and might get Indiana into a place where maybe you do start playing a few of those Power 5 non-conference games again, but it's because you're doing it from a position of strength, because you have gotten back to a place like Indiana was just a few years ago, 4 bowls in 6 years, recruiting improving, sort of program stature improving, exposure and things like that. And I pulled this up just as a way of example. Indiana, the last time before the Big Ten expanded to 9 conference games, Indiana went to a bowl game was 2007. That year, Indiana played Indiana State, Western Michigan, Akron, and Ball State in the non-conference. Now, I did go to Western Michigan, and this was at the tail end of a time when that was still, it wasn't necessarily common, but it was at least kind of, it happened every once in a while that a Big Ten team would go to a MAC school to maybe honor like a 3-game home and home kind of thing. You come to our place twice, we'll go to your place once, something like that. But the point was Indiana played an FCS school and 3 MAC teams in non-conference play in 2007. It won all 3 of those, or all 4 of those games, because of course this was an 8-game schedule. It went 3-5 in the Big Ten. It went 7-5. It went to the Insight Bowl. So it's not like Indiana's never done this before. And I would even argue that frankly, Indiana's kind of forsaken at this point the only real non-conference football rivalry it had for a very long time, which is Kentucky. They haven't played since 2005. And so far as I know, there is nothing sort of immediately on the horizon resurrecting that series. So it's not like there's not precedent for this. Indiana had kind of changed some of its non-conference scheduling approach, in part because the Big Ten handed down kind of those rules, and all that was designed around getting schools in the best possible position to qualify for or be selected for a 14 playoff. Now that we've moved to a 12-team college football playoff, the Big Ten isn't really so worried about that anymore, especially because it knows with the 4 new Pac-12 schools coming in that the Michigans, the Penn States, the Ohio States, and certainly some of those schools in the Pac-12 and others are going to have tons of opportunities for quality wins in conference play. The Big Ten doesn't need to worry about sending Penn State to play Auburn or having Michigan play Texas or whatever it might be. I'm not saying those schools won't still play Power 5 games at times, and I'm not saying Indiana won't play Power 5 non-conference opponents at times, but I think this is reflective of, moving away from this Louisville series and even being willing to pay that penalty for doing it is reflective of Indiana changing its philosophy in non-conference scheduling in a way that it hopes will improve its odds of making a bowl game more seasons than not. So you can feel how you want to feel about that. Again, I think Indiana will wear whatever criticism comes with that, especially if this does sort of, pave the road in the future to Indiana being a more regular bowl participant. And then I think Indiana, maybe if it can get to that place, will reassess and see where it's at. But just wanted to record that video, kind of explain, at least through my understanding, what Indiana's thinking is in these moves, why they're doing that, and how it might impact things kind of going forward. Hope you enjoyed this. Remember to hit like and subscribe. IndyStar.com/sports for all of our coverage. Indiana, of course, does still play Louisville this weekend in a big game at Lucas Oil Stadium. We'll be there. We'll have all kinds of coverage from that. But between now and then, for the Indianapolis Star, I'm Zach Osterman. We'll talk to you soon.